Hey guys, it's Bill from Linden, Tennessee. When last we chatted, I had made this battery box and I made at least the initial mount for it. I got that mount kind of finished up, and as it works out, this controller and this charger over here, there's a really convenient spot inside these side panels where those would mount. I'm going to put up a couple pictures right now to show you sort of what it looks like and how much clearance I have. Yeah, so not very much clearance there, but I think it's going to do. The only thing I do have kind of a concern about is this fan. When this is charging, that fan will come on, and if there's enough airflow, I don't know. We'll find out. If there's not enough airflow, then I may have to cut like a little hole on the side of that side panel and put a screen or something. I don't know. We'll get to that. Cross that bridge when we get there. I've gone ahead and mounted my batteries in there, at least temporarily. And then underneath here, got what's called a battery equalizer. I think I've talked about this before, but this basically, with all those little capacitors and things, it monitors all the cell voltages, and if one of them's high, then it'll send that voltage to one of them that's low, and just keep all the batteries balanced. And then there on the end, I've got some little quick disconnects, and these are pretty sweet. They just come undone like that. There's a little button that you push, but you slip them on there, and that's how that works. And I did this not because I'll ever make this as a modular unit, although, I mean, it really could be now, but I did this just to kind of tidy up the wires. If I would have just had like what do they call it, gland nut, they call it a gland nut, and it would have just, kind of stuck out like that, and the cable would have come out of it, and it would have had to do like this big sweep or something. So just just to kind of keep this a little bit tidier, I put these on there. And if I ever wanted to, I could lift this off and have these sort of connections elsewhere on a different thing. I don't know. I'm not going to do that anyway. But yeah, so the next thing I need to do, oh yeah, let's look at this real quick. I need to start thinking about wiring and laying out the wiring. Of course, the factory console, originally there was a throttle for the engine, and then a PTO on-off switch. And then down here, we've got just your little key switch, a light switch, and 2 fuses. Over here, I've got laid out, best I can think, all the components I'm going to need to find homes for in this thing. We'll start with a wiring diagram. We'll start with a wiring diagram for this controller over here. Now, you look down there, got a whole bunch of different little connectors, and we got three silver high voltage, high current connectors. All right, now we can come over here. Let's look at this. Now, the wiring on this, a lot of people have asked and say they're intimidated, and I can understand that if you've never done anything like this, but man, this is super simple. You got your high voltage pack right here, my 48 volt pack. Your positive comes up this way, goes over to a contactor. That's what those little doohickeys are. Comes over to the contactor, comes through the contactor, goes to one of the battery terminals on the controller, and then just goes to the positive terminal of the motor. Your negative side comes along here, goes to the other high current thing on the controller, and then this controller actually controls the voltage and or current, I'm not exactly sure, someone can tell me, coming out, going to the negative terminal of the motor. And then the inputs are pretty simple. You've got your key switch, like I just showed you. That comes through one of these little fuses that I've already got a little place for it. Picks up the 48 volts from the battery, sends it up, and then down into the contactor. Now that I'm seeing that it wants to use 48 volts to do this, those contactors aren't going to work. I'm going to have to get a 48 volt contactor. All right, you're here with me. Comes over to the contactor, sends that same 48 voltage straight to the controller. The controller then monitors this voltage right here. And see how we've already got 12 volts here to this resistor. It's going to monitor what this voltage is. And then once this voltage is high enough, then it'll go ahead and close this contactor. The reason for doing that, like I say, these have got capacitors in there, and if you just close this, those capacitors are going to take a huge rush of current, and it's going to cause arcing on these terminals, and it'll cause all kinds of problems. This is a little diode. All this does is whenever you open and close this contactor windings, there is a voltage that's created, and this capacitor just dissipates that voltage. And then the other wiring is a throttle, which is that doohickey right there. This is just a potentiometer. And then there's 2 wires that come off of that, and they go into the controller. And that's it. That's really all there is to it. It's very, very simple. And then, like I showed you over on the thing, I got my ignition switch for the key switch, of course, and I got a fuse. And then other things that I'm going to need is this contactor, or I may have to get a different one with 48 volts, or I could just run this one off of the 12-volt system. I don't know. This contactor is going to be for my my electric power takeoff, like I have on the other tractor, and that's kind of cool because there'll be one connector right there, and then that can go to front implements, and then there'll be one in the back for rear implements. And the way this is going to work is I've got my front PTO motor will be, the negative will come directly off of the battery and go to it, but then the positive will pass through here and then go to it again. But it's also going to pass through here. And in the same way that we had kind of a resistor that charged up these capacitors so we didn't have a huge arc across these contacts, this little doohickey is basically just a small motor controller. So this is like 10 amps instead of 500 like the blue one is. So it's a little 10 amp motor controller. And then I've got a little rheostat here that will slowly ramp up the motor speed. So whereas this resistor slowly ramped up this power going into the capacitors, this one is going to slowly ramp the power going into the motor. And the motor will start to spin really slow. It'll speed up. And then once it gets high enough, I'll have a switch, that switch right there, and I can go ahead and give full power to the PTO motor. And in the same way, it'll reduce or eliminate arcing on this contactor and just saves everything. So that's how that's going to work. This here doohickey, this is called a shunt. This is for my display. My display is going to show me voltage and battery percentage and amperage going through it and kilowatts and all kinds of stuff. But a shunt is just basically it's a very precisely tuned resistor, and as current goes through this, there's a very small millivolt voltage drop across these terminals. And this little circuit here is just taking the power negative and the battery positive, and it's measuring the difference between those two, and then it can calculate how many amps you're using, and it knows how many kilowatts because it knows how many amps, and it already knows how many volts, so it just multiplies them together and gets you your kilowatts. Then it's also got a timer in there, so it can measure how much amps over a period of time you've consumed, and that gives you your amp hours. And you can multiply those amp hours times your voltage and you get kilowatt. Anyway, that's what that does. That's just a display, and that needs to be mounted somewhere else. And these little doohickeys, I'm going to put these little guys somewhere in here. They'll come through the frame, and that way the battery terminals from my PTO contactor will go to this, and then I'll just have some external cables going across the side of the tractor just like I do on the other one. And that is how that's going to be. Over here, got my charger. This is the output to the battery, so it can get charged. And this is the input from the wall, of course. Now this is going to go to its own little fuse, probably like a 60 amp, 50 amp fuse, something like that. This is only a 15 amp charger, but you typically upsize the fuse. So that'll go to its own little fuse. And all of this stuff, jumpy at it. And I've also got this here gizmo. And what this is a DC-DC converter. This takes the 48 volts and steps it down to 12 volts. So if I do use one of these contactors, it'll have power for that, and it'll also give power to headlights. All of this stuff needs to go into a little box, I think. I'm going to try and build a little box back here that I can access that, but it'll just have a lid on it. It'll kind of be same as that, but smaller. But it'll be a little weatherproof box. It'll go back there somewhere. And I suppose I've even got some room up here if I wanted to. I could put, I don't know, I could split it up so it's not all into one. It gets all complicated. And then the final dude is this guy. Of course, this is just a battery, or an inlet for 110 volt. And I think I'm going to mount that up here in front. Now, from the factory, there was a hole in the grill that was for the exhaust. It was for the exhaust. So I think what I'm going to do is just have this mounted somewhere, and then behind it, behind it I'll have like that, something like that. That is the plan. And right, I think that takes care of it for now. That's what I've got to do. Got to figure all that stuff out and make some boxes and make some brackets and mount it all up. But it's coming along. We'll be turning wheels here before we know it. All right, guys, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.